in this textbook that we're going to be using, America's Religions, right? He starts out talking about telling stories. And he uses the word narrative, and he goes back and forth with this quite a bit. And he'll do that throughout the book. Why does he start out with telling stories? Because this book, and any account of religion in America, ultimately has to be telling some sort of set of stories or some overarching story. And there's this question, is it possible to have one, here's a key word, coherent story? You can tell one story. Like you could say, well, you know, the Puritans came here and then everything went to crap after that. That would be one coherent story. Would that be an accurate story? No, because you're leaving an awful lot of people out, and it doesn't seem like it's actually correct to say that it all went to you know, the heap after this. So when people were doing religious studies for a long time, they tended to tell the story, like he says, from a perspective that was kind of narrow. Yeah, it was what we could call the Protestant Consensus. And this tended to be not just any Protestants, you know, Episcopalians and Lutherans, you know, liturgically oriented Protestants were kind of left out of the picture. And, of course, Catholics, Jews, you know, Eastern Orthodox, they were kind of left out of the picture as well, or actually turned into the bad guys. If you look at a lot of the narratives about the religious history of the United States that are, you know, told early on, they view it as this, you know, city on a hill, and as doing something quite different, but also getting away from the decadent Europeans and the things that they were involved in. Over time, and there's a lot of reasons for this that he's going to go into, the picture gets bigger and it widens, and more people get involved in telling the story. And with time, you get a lot of Catholic voices involved, a lot of Jewish voices involved. So by the 1950s, you can actually have a book called Protestant Catholic Jew as a history of American religion, talking about those as being like the great themes. And things start to get more complicated as time goes on. Like he says, we end up expanding this to all sorts of other groups that have been sort of marginalized, left out of the picture. Who would those include? Who would have been left out? I mean, you know, think about this. When did America start? With the Constitution, with the Puritans, with the people here before, you know, Native Americans. If we want to tell the story of religion in America, there were people practicing religions before the explorers got here. Are everybody's, you know, perspectives equally represented in this? African Americans get left out quite often. Did immigration only come from Europe? Or forced immigration from Africa? Yeah.
Asian American.
Yeah, and so, you know, we have to think about other, let's just put down this is going to be really generalizing, but we'll call it just world religions, right? So that I don't have to write a million things on the boards. Hindus coming from India, from Indonesia, from other parts of what was at one time called Greater India. Buddhists coming from a variety of countries. Taoists, Confucians, practitioners of ancestral Chinese religion, Shinto practitioners from Japan, Muslims from all over the globe, Zoroastrians, not a lot of them left in the world. A lot of people have been coming here from many different places for quite a long time, and bringing their religions with them. So if we want to tell a story that's inclusive, we want to incorporate those voices. But now we end up with a different sort of problem, don't we? Because what happens when, imagine like right now, if everyone was to just start talking, what would it be like in this room?
Chaotic.
Yeah. Could you follow any one conversation? Imagine that you guys are all talking, and not just like, talking about the same thing, but about totally different things, and I'm up here trying to lecture. And like, you're actually trying to listen. Could you actually pay attention to what I'm saying? Probably not. It would be a babble, literally. And when we start to, say everybody's going to have, their own point of view, that's one of the dangers to that it just degenerates into everybody's got their own little bubble that they're in, and you can hear what people are saying in that, but you get outside of that, and it's just sort of a wash of stories. None of them match up to each other, map onto each other. And so what we want to do, and what he's trying to do in this book, is provide something that has at least, a nod to being representative, to incorporating as many voices as possible into the story, but also focuses on the things that are most central, the things that are most determinative, the things that are most relevant. That's why it's got the order that it does. He also wants to talk about a number of different important themes that are coming up. So that's our blurb on stories. We're talking about religion. We can talk about private religion and public religion, or he actually uses the term personal. So what is personal religion? It's, what an individual person has, does, thinks, belongs to them, so to speak. Religious autobiography would be an example of this that he talks about. Individual narratives. I guess you could put in, things that are involved with a family over time could fit in with that as well. So, public religion is what he's going to focus on. And why? Well, because, if you want to actually have a book, this is a pretty thick book, but if you want to have any sort of unity, you can't focus on every single person's story, can you? You gotta look at the things that they all have in common, the things that are more determinative, the bigger picture items. And so we want to think for a little bit, and he leads us through this, about, well, what does public religion involve? So what is public religion? It's structures. Structures that groups or communities or traditions have in common. When you're practicing a religion, or when you're looking at a religion to study it, you're generally looking at things that people have in common, that are connected with each other. So what are these some, kind of common elements that religious groups or communities, faiths, whatever you want to call them, that they all tend to have? He ends up talking about this term, tradition. What's a tradition? You guys have family traditions? Your parents come and visit you up here every once in a while? Or down here if you're from further upstate? Do you go to the same place? Same diner? There's lots of diners around here. Maybe take you out to buy something nice for you if your grades are good. That could be a tradition. You do it a number of times, and then, like, if your kids go to Marist and you're, their legacy, you might do the same thing and say, yeah, when I was a kid, when I was in school, my mom and dad used to do this with me, and I found this kind of meaningful, so I'm going to pass it on to you. Do you do anything around the holidays? Or when you had break, did you just go home and see some old friends, maybe go out a few times, watch some movies? Or did you do anything that's tied together with that part of the year? Was there a tree in any of your houses? Maybe a fake tree? It had some stuff on it? Lights? Tinsel, maybe? Maybe you have a real tree. That's a tradition, right? If you go home and you're used to that sort of thing, and there's no tree, you kind of wonder what's going on. Are mom and dad slipping? Is somebody depressed? What's happened here? Did they, lose their Christmas spirit? And then there's all sorts of other things. We're going to run into another set of traditions pretty soon that are originally, there's some sort of, I guess, religious background to it, but now it's more of a commercial holiday. Give you a hint. Pink, red, and white. What are those the colors for? Valentine's Day, and everybody better start buying cards and stocking up on flowers and writing some poems and getting reservations, that sort of thing. That's a tradition. And the same thing happens with religion. You do the same thing over and over and over again, and it happens over generations, and it becomes something that is integral to what you do. It becomes part of your life. It provides, like he says, overarching meaning and order to people's lives. If you go to church every Sunday, what does it feel like when you don't go to church? Maybe if you don't like going to church, it's like, yeah, this is great. I can finally sleep in. But if you like that sort of thing, you feel kind of an emptiness, a kind of what's wrong here sort of thing. That's because that's a tradition that provides meaning and order in people's lives. And traditions are tied in with entire cultures. Great example of this, what they call Sunday laws. In some states you can't, say, buy liquor or beer on a Sunday. Indiana's an example of that, as I found out. I came from Wisconsin, where we could buy beer pretty much all the time. When I worked in a gas station, actually, I did a Class C liquor license, so I could sell, all the stuff that we sold in gas stations to people. That's how much they like the beer and liquor there. And then I remember my relatives lived in Indiana. This is when I was in college, going out on a Sunday night and going to the local pharmacy where you would buy beer, and we'd run out of beer, so we went, and I walk up there to the front, and they said, "I can't sell that to you." And I said, "Why not?" "Well, I'm of age." And she said, "Well, it's Sunday." I was like, "So what?" "Well, we just don't sell beer on Sunday." And at first I thought it was the store. And so I said, "Well, who does?" And she said, "Well, you could go across the state line to Illinois, because they'll sell it over there." And it was only 45 minutes to the state line. We didn't actually do that, but and I was like, wait a second, this whole state? You don't sell beer on Sunday? Why the hell not? Well, because somebody felt that, Sunday is the day of rest, the Lord's day, and this was an institutionalization of something that was part of culture. By the way, the Supreme Court has ruled that those sort of laws are in fact constitutional if they serve some secular purpose. Tradition and culture tend to be something that exists in people and in communities. What shores them up? What we call institutions. Prime example of an institution would be a church. And you could think of, the individual church building. When you have a church building, is the church just the building? Sometimes, if there's nobody going to it, I suppose you could say it's that church. But what else is the church? It's kind of a dead church if it's just a building. What else is the church? Yeah.
The community and people.
Yeah, and there's always going to be people going in and going out. Some people are closer to the center than others, but there'll be some sort of core that constitutes that. And now, if that church actually belongs to a larger group, They might also use the word church for that. So think about, for example, Catholics. There's one giant thing that's called church that has about 1 billion members worldwide. And then there'll be, the church associated with each archdiocese or diocese. And then each of those will have a whole slew of individual churches called local churches, and each one of those is a church. All of those are examples of institution. There you've got institution at several levels. Southern Baptist Convention would be an example of an institution. They say convention instead of church because they have a different sort of associational model where they vote to get together, and if they don't like what's going on with the convention, they can leave. But it's still the same thing. It's an institution. A Hindu temple would be an example of an institution. A synagogue would be an example of an institution. And we could go on and on with this sort of thing. So those are important. What else are we missing out of this picture? Well, we often have people who are charged with being more central to this sort of business, don't we? Being at the heart of it. And we use this term clergy for them as sort of a generic term. That could be a Muslim imam, that could be a Hebrew cantor, that could be a reverend, that could be, clergy here doesn't necessarily mean somebody who's presiding over services. It could be the religious, like monks and nuns, which many different religions have ascetic members of the society who belong to that. And those are the people who are, charged with making sure that everything gets passed down right and that the rituals are done correctly. And then they also tend to do something important that's called theology. And theology, what do we mean by that if we're using it in this very generic sense? It's the reflection upon the practices, the beliefs, the doctrines, the revealed things that they believe to connect them with the divine. So, Martin Luther King, to use him as an example, Martin Luther King was a theologian. A lot of people don't realize that. He wasn't just about organizing marches. He was organizing marches because he thought that was what the gospel required. And he provides you with arguments about how this actually comes out of the gospel. Great example of that would be a letter from a Birmingham jail. By the way, you know who that letter was written to? It wasn't written to the police chief of Birmingham. It was written to a lot of other clergy, including other black clergy, who were criticizing him and saying, you shouldn't be doing what you're doing. The Bible says, obey the law. And you're breaking the law. So he was actually making an argument saying, yeah, these are unjust laws. Here's how to understand them as unjust laws. He actually drew on other theologians like St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas in making his argument. If you haven't read Letter from a Birmingham Jail, you should read it. It's really a brilliant piece of work. And it's an example of theology. It wasn't just, public relations. It was actually theology. He was working out what his religious viewpoint required. That's why it's such an important document for American religious history. These are all aspects of public religion. And we're going to be paying attention to all of these over the course of the semester. You want to know these terms because we're going to be using these, and the textbook is going to be using them quite frequently. The last thing that we're going to hit on, there's a number of different themes that this author thinks are particularly connected with America. And we're not going to have time to go into each one of these. He gives you a list of these. Here we go. On page 6. He says that one of the things that's been really central in America has been this denominationalism that we'll come to later on. And he talks about mobility, immigration, British culture, slavery and race, democracy, populism, capitalism, nationalism, pluralism, and Americanization. You might say, that's an awful lot of jargon terms. Why is he laying those out for you? He gives you like a little rundown in a paragraph for each one of these, why these are central themes for American religion and the history of American religion and what's going on and how they still impact it today. So mobility, what does he mean by that? He talks about social mobility and being able to move from place to place. That is something that is particularly American in comparison to where people were coming from. This was a place where you could move up, and a lot of people would do that. They would actually trade up churches. Immigration, he's going to make a distinction there between forced immigration, like slavery consisted in, and voluntary immigration. British culture, America is a mixture of a lot of different cultures, but British culture set sort of the pattern and predominated for quite some time. Slavery and race is a very important part of American religious history. Democracy itself, a lot of denominations, even ones that are very hierarchical, like Catholicism and Orthodoxy, they tended to take on a more democratic, more responsive to the populist kind of mode to them. Capitalism, that's going to be an important thing to talk about. America was always, from the beginning, as a country, within the global marketplace. And so it's not like we had a pre-capitalist beginning, the way a lot of European countries did. And it's interesting because a lot of people will talk about churches behaving in a capitalistic manner, going after market share. Those will be things that we'll talk about. Pluralism, we've talked a little bit about that, and then Americanization. A lot of religious groups came here from other places and had a lot of beliefs already coming in. There's not a ton of new groups that started within the United States themselves, but they became Americanized. So we want to think over the course of the semester, what does that mean? What is distinctive about American approaches to religion? We're really a unique country in many respects. We're the most religious first world developed country. A lot of the other developed countries, religion has gone on the wane. That didn't happen here in the United States the way it happened in France or in Italy or in Spain. So we're gonna think about a lot of these themes over the course of the semester. These are just some, well, I don't have the things written here, but those are some of the things to keep in mind as we plow our way through this textbook.